Now here we are again back in the view administrator, and there's another aspect that we're going to use, which is called the arguments. This is a really cool feature of the views, and I use this all the time. Basically what this does is it allows you to pass in a variable to the view and have the view dynamically add that variable to its filter criteria. So let's go ahead and click on the plus sign next to arguments. And because we want our argument or our filter criteria is the taxonomy, what we're going to do is just select the taxonomy here. And then what we're going to do is select taxonomy term. So if we pass in standard as an argument, we want the view to filter out just the standard videos. It's going to be really cool once you see what this does. So let's just click on add. And then it's going to give us a lot of different parameters that we can choose to use here. From my experience, just using the default works. So let's just click on update down at the bottom. Now that that's added the taxonomy term as an argument, we need to make sure again to save the view. Very important. Don't forget, save. Now that we've saved it, let's go back to our page that we created. So go to administer, content. Now let's go back to the dash playlist. So now let's just play around with these arguments and just see how they work in the Dash Media Player. Like I said before, our goal here is to be able to filter this content based on the videos that are in our system. So let's go ahead and use those arguments within the view and utilize those within the player. We do that by clicking on edit. Let me zoom in here so you guys can see what I'm doing. The very first thing that I'm going to do here is in the body is I'm going to add a new parameter. And this parameter is going to be called arg1. So I say params, and it's called arg1. Basically what this means is that this is the very first argument for this view. If you remember, we created the taxonomy term name as an argument. Now, but why the 1? What would it be if I had 2? Well, you can use 2. This is if you have more than 1 arguments for the view, which you can set up. So let's say if my taxonomy term was the second argument, I would use arg2 instead of arg1. But since it's the first argument, I'm going to use arg1. And then let's just say I want to show the high definition videos. So I go high definition. I need to make sure that this matches the term name that I set up. So once I have that, let me zoom out. I go down to the bottom here and I press save, and let's just see what this does. Voila, it shows just the high definition videos. Now that's really cool, but this isn't really useful yet because I don't want to have to sit there and change the PHP code if I want them to switch between standard and high definition. What I would really rather is to set it up like this, where the user decides on what term they want to filter the playlist by. And this is where the dynamic links come into play. So let's go ahead and do this by setting up the PHP. To do that, we're going to go back to our website, and we're going to click on the edit. Let me zoom in again so you see what I'm doing. Now, in order to set up the tabs at the top of the playlist, we're going to use 3 different arguments for the Dash Media Player. For each tab requires 3 different parameters, and they are as follows. Let's start off by just deleting this line because we don't really need it anymore. For the very first tab, in fact, I'm going to add a comment here. First, or we'll call it the standard tab. So the very first parameter for that tab is going to be called link arg1. The 1, whenever you use link, that basically means a tab. So these are links. So you have that link and you have this as a link. Whenever I say link, that means tab. Arg means the argument to the view that I set up, which remember is the taxonomy term name. Now this 1 is a little bit different than the arg1. This one, for a link, refers to the very first tab. So whenever I set up the high def tab, this is going to need to be 2. So let's say, okay, so this is the argument to the view, so that needs to be standard. The next parameter that I need to provide for this tab is called link index 1. 1 meaning that it's the first tab. Now the index is the argument index for the view. So again, if I have more than one argument for the view, then this would actually be 1. In the taxonomy is the second argument. However, it's the first argument, it's almost always going to be 0. This is so that you can select which argument you want to provide as that tab. I press enter, and then I go params. The third parameter I need to provide for the tab is the text within the actual tab. And that's called link text 1. We can just keep this as standard. So there I go. I've set up the standard tab. Let's do the exact same thing for the high definition. So what I'm going to do is just copy this and paste it. And we're going to call this the high definition tab. So because this is the second tab, I need to change these 1s to 2s. And the argument is called high definition. It's the first argument, so it needs to be 0. Now here's where I don't want my text to be the same as the arg. Because this is really long, I don't want my tab to be really long, so I'm just going to kind of say high def. That'll work. Okay, so now that I've got all that written, I should be able to zoom out, go over here and press save, and then see all of a sudden I've got, okay, we'll get to this later, but you should see I have a standard which filters out my standard videos, and then I have a high def which filters out my high def. I know they're high def because I provided votes for them, whereas I didn't provide votes for the standard ones. Really cool. But what about this all tab? This is a little tricky because by default, the Dash Media Player provides this all tab that basically says no arguments. But what I want is what TMT Digital has, where there is no alt tab. So how do I do that? How do I get rid of the alt tab? Well, it requires a little bit of trickery, but it's fairly easy once you figure out how to do it. You're just going to click on Edit, and basically what we want to do is we just want to replace the alt tab, seen here, with the standard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename the all to standard, and then provide a default argument to the player, if that makes sense. So you provide a default argument to the player and then just rename this first tab to standard, and then it will basically act as it replaced the all tab. Let me explain. I'll walk you through it. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename that's all tab, and that's using a new argument or parameter called link all text. It's the all tab text, and I'm going to say equals standard. And now I need to provide a default argument. Well, we've already done this before, but let me just remind you. You do that by just saying arg1 equals standard. So this now becomes the standard tab. So I can go ahead and delete this guy. But now I need to make sure that the high def is the second tab. So I need to make sure that I change this guy to 1. So now what I've done here is I've replaced that all tab with the text standard and provided a default argument of standard, so that whenever I first show the player, it's going to go ahead and default that. So let's see what this does. Let's go ahead and save. And as you can see, I get what I want. I have standard tab, which only shows the standard videos. It seems to be working. It's very cool. And then if I click on high def, if they want to see high definition videos, it shows the high definition version, which takes a little longer to download. So now you can see how you can use arguments within your views to really add a whole nother dimension to your media player. This is just one of the many different features that this media player offers that sets it apart from the rest.